Nearly 50 days now since Savannah Guthrie's mother disappeared. That suspected abduction remains unsolved tonight. But we've learned investigators have recovered additional images from Nancy Guthrie's surveillance cameras. National correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti has our update.
An 84-year-old woman vanished overnight, without a trace. No forced exit, no clear suspect. But hidden cameras captured something that changed the entire case. So, what really happened inside that house? Did she leave on her own, or was she taken? And if someone was watching, who were they waiting for? Hi guys, welcome to Horrific Crimes. Here we cover real true crime cases, from shocking murders and missing persons to dark relationship crimes. Each episode digs into the motives and secrets behind the headlines. Please like and subscribe for weekly uploads that reveal the darkest corners of human behavior. Now, let's get into the story. Nancy Guthrie was an 84-year-old woman living a quiet and structured life in Arizona. Her days followed a simple routine, built around familiarity and comfort. She lived in her own home, a place she had grown used to over time, where everything had its place. There was nothing unusual about how she spent her time. She kept to herself, avoided unnecessary attention, and maintained a peaceful lifestyle that reflected her personality. For someone her age, consistency was important, and Nancy made sure her daily life remained predictable and stable. People who knew her described her as calm, reserved, and deeply private. She was not the type to involve herself in conflicts or complicated situations. Instead, she focused on staying connected with her family and managing her day-to-day activities. Despite being in her 80s, Nancy remained mentally aware and continued to communicate regularly with those close to her. Phone calls, check-ins, and small routines helped maintain that connection. These habits made it easier for her family to notice quickly when something was wrong, because silence from Nancy was not normal. Nancy was also widely recognized because of her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, a well-known television journalist. While Nancy herself stayed out of the public eye, her connection to someone in the media made her identity more visible than most people her age. Even with that visibility, Nancy did not live a high-profile life. She remained grounded in her routine and continued to live quietly without drawing attention to herself or her surroundings. Neighbors saw nothing that raised concern. There were no signs of ongoing disputes, no unusual visitors, and no history of threats. The area around her home was considered calm, and Nancy fit into that environment without standing out. She was simply known as an elderly woman living alone, keeping to her routine. From the outside, everything about her life suggested stability. There were no warning signs that pointed to danger, and nothing that indicated she could become the center of an investigation. Everything about Nancy Guthrie's life appeared normal and predictable. There were no sudden changes, no reported fears, and no clear reason for concern. That is what made the situation more difficult to understand. When someone with a quiet and consistent lifestyle suddenly disappears, it creates a different kind of mystery. It raises questions not just about what happened, but about why it happened at all. And in Nancy's case, those questions began the moment her routine was broken, on a night that, at first, seemed no different from any other. On the evening of February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie returned home, as expected. The moment did not stand out in any unusual way. She had been dropped off at her residence, and from the outside, everything appeared routine. There were no reports of suspicious activity at that time, no signs that anything was about to go wrong. For anyone observing from a distance, it looked like the end of a normal day. That quiet return would later become the final confirmed moment she was seen. As the night passed, there were no immediate alarms. It wasn't until the following day that concern began to build. Calls placed to Nancy went unanswered, which was not typical for her. Family members who were used to regular communication started to notice the silence. Hours passed without any response. Messages were left, but none were returned. The absence of contact quickly shifted from unusual to alarming. At that point, the situation was no longer seen as a simple missed call or delayed response. The growing concern led to a decision to check on her directly. When authorities arrived at the home and gained access, the atmosphere inside immediately fell off. It was not a single obvious detail, but rather a combination of small inconsistencies that created concern. The interior did not reflect the orderly environment Nancy was known to maintain. Certain items were not where they should have been, and the arrangement of the space suggested disruption rather than routine use. This difference was enough to raise serious questions. As investigators looked more closely, the condition of the home pointed towards something more serious than a simple absence. There were clear signs that the space had been disturbed. Objects appeared moved without explanation, and the overall state of the home did not match a person leaving on their own terms. More importantly, there were indications that some form of physical struggle may have taken place. These findings changed how the situation was viewed. It no longer suggested a voluntary disappearance or a medical emergency inside the home. With these early observations, the case quickly shifted in direction. What began as concern for an elderly woman who could not be reached turned into a possible crime scene. The details inside the home suggested that Nancy Guthrie did not simply walk away. Instead, something had interrupted her normal routine in a sudden and forceful way. At that stage, one conclusion became difficult to ignore. This was not an ordinary disappearance, and whatever happened inside that house had likely involved another person. As the situation inside the home became clearer, investigators began to treat the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie as a possible abduction. The early signs did not point toward an accident or a voluntary absence. Instead, the condition of the scene suggested that someone else had been involved. Officers secured the area and started a detailed examination, focusing on anything that could explain what had taken place during the hours Nancy was last known to be inside. During this process, specific forms of physical evidence began to stand out. Certain markings and disruptions indicated that force may have been used. The positioning of objects, combined with subtle traces left behind, suggested that Nancy did not leave the house on her own. These were not random details. Each one added to a growing picture that something had gone wrong in a direct and controlled way. Investigators worked methodically, documenting every element, knowing that even the smallest clue could become important later. Then, a key development shifted the direction of the case. Security cameras positioned around the property and nearby areas were reviewed. In that footage, investigators identified a figure moving close to Nancy's home during the relevant time frame. The individual appeared to be wearing a mask, making identification difficult. More concerning was the way the person moved, steady, deliberate, and focused. There was no sign of hesitation. At one point, the figure also appeared to be carrying an object that authorities believed could be a weapon. This discovery changed how the case was understood. What had already seemed suspicious now pointed more strongly toward a planned act. Investigators began to consider the possibility that Nancy had been specifically targeted. The presence of a masked individual, combined with the earlier evidence inside the home, suggested preparation rather than chance. This was no longer just about what happened inside the house, but also about who had approached it and why. From that point forward, the investigation expanded. Officers collected additional footage from surrounding properties, searching for any angle that could provide a clearer image of the suspect's path. They analyzed movement patterns, estimated timing, and attempted to track where the individual came from and where they went afterward. Despite these efforts, one major issue remained. The identity of the person seen on camera was still unknown. Without that connection, the case continued to move forward, but without clear answers about who was responsible. As the investigation continued to build, one critical detail remained unchanged. Nancy Guthrie was still missing. Despite the growing amount of evidence collected from her home and the surrounding area, there was no confirmed location tied to her disappearance. Search efforts extended beyond the property, covering nearby streets, open land, and locations that could have been accessed within a short time frame. Yet none of those efforts produced a clear answer. There was no verified sighting, no confirmed movement, and no indication of where she had been taken. At the same time, the person seen in the surveillance footage remained unidentified. Investigators worked to enhance images, compare patterns, and follow possible leads, but none led to a confirmed suspect. Without a name or clear identity, the case faced a major obstacle. The figure's presence suggested involvement, but it did not explain motive or connection. This left investigators trying to understand not only who the person was, but also why Nancy's home had been chosen. The absence of that link made the situation more difficult to resolve. Another issue that added pressure to the investigation was the lack of a clear motive. There were no known disputes, no reported threats, and no obvious reason for someone to target Nancy. Her lifestyle did not suggest exposure to risk, and nothing in her recent activities pointed toward conflict. This made the case more complex. When a crime lacks a visible reason, it becomes harder to predict the suspect's behavior or next move. Investigators had to consider multiple possibilities, ranging from a planned act to something less direct but still intentional. Concerns also grew due to Nancy's age and condition. At 84 years old, surviving without assistance for an extended period would be difficult under most circumstances. This added urgency to the search and influenced how experts viewed the situation. While no official conclusion was made about her condition, the passage of time became an important factor. Each day, without new information, increased uncertainty, making it harder to determine what may have happened after she disappeared from her home. Despite all these challenges, the case has not been closed. Authorities continue to treat it as an active investigation, holding on to the possibility that new evidence could emerge. What remains is a situation defined by unanswered questions. With no confirmed location, no identified suspect, and no clear motive, the case stands in a state of uncertainty. This leads to the central question that continues to shape the investigation. Was this a carefully planned abduction? Or does the truth involve something more complex that has yet to be uncovered? Today, the case of Nancy Guthrie remains unresolved, with key questions still unanswered. Investigators have not stepped away from the case, but progress has been limited by the lack of definitive leads. Updates have been careful and controlled, with authorities choosing not to release every detail publicly. Behind the scenes, the case continues to move forward through analysis, follow-ups, and ongoing review of evidence already collected. However, without a breakthrough, the investigation remains open-ended. Search efforts have not been limited to one phase. Over time, different strategies have been used, including revisiting earlier findings and re-examining materials with fresh perspective. Tips from the public have been considered, though none have led to a confirmed resolution. The individual seen in surveillance footage still has not been identified, and that unknown factor continues to shape the direction of the case. Without that missing piece, many of the existing clues remain disconnected, forming a puzzle that has yet to come together. For those following the case, the silence between updates has become part of the story. Each passing period without new information adds to the uncertainty. The details that are known raise questions, but they do not provide closure. Investigators are left working within those limits, balancing what can be confirmed with what still needs to be proven. This creates a situation where the case moves forward, but without clear answers to guide it toward a conclusion. What makes this case stand out is not only what was found, but also what is still missing. There is no confirmed explanation for why Nancy was targeted, and no clear understanding of what happened after the events inside her home. The lack of resolution has kept the case active, but also unresolved in a way that leaves space for multiple possibilities. Each theory depends on evidence that has not yet been fully connected or confirmed. So now the focus returns to the same questions that have remained from the beginning. Who would target an elderly woman living a quiet and predictable life? What events unfolded inside that house that led to her disappearance? And most importantly, where is Nancy Guthrie? Until those questions are answered, the case remains open and the search for the truth continues. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video.